Darnisa, tell me about your improvement goal and why it was important to you.
So my improvement goal was to begin to collaborate more with other people and to build and sustain networks. It was really important to me because I realized my career was moving in a way where the only way for me to be more successful was for me to collaborate. But initially, I was terrified. And the first thing I told you, I hate teams, I hate groups, I hate everything about it.
I don't do teams.
I don't do teams at all. And I had had horrible experiences working where I felt my trust had been violated. I was angry with certain people that I've worked with because I always like to say they didn't hold my heart. So things that I shared were openly shared in large spaces, or I was given certain projects knowing that I wouldn't be able to be successful, working on them with a group of people who were pretty contentious. I started my own business just so I wouldn't have to work with people, and for 5 years I worked absolutely alone. And the people that I was working with, it wasn't collaboration. It was, this is what I need you to do, this is how we're going to do it, but it wasn't a real dialogue. And I knew that I couldn't take that sort of belief into my future work.
So why do you feel like it was important for you to push yourself and to learn how to be more collaborative and build a network?
Well, particularly because as I get more successful, there's just capacity-wise, I can't do it all. And then there's also the Darnisa part where I don't want to do it all. You know, I'm tired now, and I don't think that expending that type of energy trying to avoid working with people is going to help me really impact children in the way I want to. You know, this is a team effort, and if I really believe that you can change the world, it can't be an I. Like, we need to change the world, and I really believe that. I just haven't lived it until recently.
And how important was it to you to make progress on that goal?
Very important. That's why I was a 5. For me, it's been on my mind for years. Every time I have to do, 2, 3 a.m. work sessions, and I'm saying to myself, if there were other people here, I could have been in bed, 5 hours ago, or at least watching something or reading or just something, not exhausting myself. I definitely agree with that analogy of the gas and the brake. So the goal of creating more collaborative relationships and actually building a network was very important to me, but there would be these key moments where I found myself holding myself back. So for example, I can remember a couple of instances where I was physically thinking to myself, okay, you got this meeting scheduled, you're going to be able to collaborate with all these people, and then 20 minutes before the meeting, I'm sending texts and emails, to cancel the meeting. Just as I got so close to doing the thing, that idea of being vulnerable and being open and feeling controlled, I felt was really pulling me back from that goal. I think the biggest fear for me was being vulnerable and feeling like I let other people down. And just really considering this idea of vulnerability and what that means. That means that you can see that I'm not perfect. I am a perfectionist, so that's a really hard thing to sit with for me. Also, I realized that I might have to compromise some of my habits in order to work with other people, and I don't know if I was ready at that point to do that, or if I even really wanted to do that. And I didn't really want to open myself up, so that goes back to feeling vulnerable. In order to not be misunderstood, that would mean that I would have to start telling people what I was actually thinking. And telling people what I was actually thinking means that they can hurt me. And those were really huge fears that permeated everything that I did, and showed themselves in multiple places, not just in work. I really value being self-reliant and being able to sort of do my own thing. And I felt that if I compromised and became more vulnerable, that I wouldn't be autonomous at all, that I'd actually be controlled and manipulated by other people's wants or different directives, and I didn't like that. So one of the main things that I think is really important for this immunity to change work is being honest with yourself, being really honest and vulnerable, even if you don't tell someone else. Just write it down. I don't think I would have been able to get to this place had I not considered where some of these feelings were coming from in the first place. My belief system is totally wrapped up in this map, and being able to write it down and to be honest with myself about when I feel upset, why I feel upset, was incredibly helpful in doing this. I don't think if I hadn't reflected on why I get so upset about working with other people, for example, I wouldn't have figured out what I was doing and wasn't doing, or what those hidden commitments were. So a former boss of mine whom I worked with about 6 years ago, we did not end things well. We ended very tensely. I immediately pushed her away in terms of communication. She did try to reach out to me after I resigned from that position. I did not respond to her emails. I would not respond to her phone calls, and I would not respond. Even she actually sent me letters trying to make amends for what she thought was a very tense situation. So I finally responded to her, thinking about the fact that I do push people away. I thought it was important, and at least in the first test, to try to reestablish a connection over the phone. Mm-hmm. Phones felt safe. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to look at her directly in the eye. I didn't feel any of the same resentment because I wasn't physically looking at her. I was just listening to her. She wanted to Skype, and I told her I didn't think I was ready at that point to do a face-to-face, that I might get defensive. So we set up a time. She said, well, what do you want to talk about during this call? And I said, I think we should just talk about what happened 5 years ago. We should talk about what happened, and I would actually love to just hear your side of it, which was something very different. Actually taking on somebody else's opinions and hearing how they felt meant that I couldn't blame her anymore. I had to let something go, and it felt really great to do that. We had a short phone call. We scheduled it about a week out, and I started actually by telling her what my goal was. And that was really different. I was vulnerable. I opened up, and I said, listen, I want to build a relationship with more people. I don't want to feel like I'm out here by myself. And we did work really well together for a year until this crazy situation happened. Let's start again. And she said, well, that's really exciting. I'm glad that you told me your goal. And then she surprised me, and she said, how can I help you to do that? This is someone that I thought hated me. Even though she sent me all these letters, that's the things I was telling myself. But it was really awesome to be able to start with her perspective of the situation. I mentioned my perspective, and I noticed something interesting happening during the conversation. I wasn't defensive. I wasn't angry. I was actually taking notes. I was really listening to her, which is something that I don't think I've ever done before. And I know that maybe we both grew in the interim of the conversations, but just hearing her be so excited about helping me really made me believe that my assumption may actually have been wrong. That even just my assumption about her as a person was really wrong. And we had a miscommunication, and I was so set on maintaining this idea that people didn't view me in a positive light, or that people were trying to take away my autonomy, that I didn't even consider that she was trying to help me.
Great.
So it was really great.
So just to be super clear, what was the data that you were paying attention to let you know whether your big assumption was or wasn't accurate in that situation?
Well, I was really listening to her commentary about how the situation happened and what were the effects of our disagreement. And I noticed that she was really listening to me. She was asking follow-up questions. She was probing as to why I was so upset, which said to me, if she didn't care, she wouldn't be listening. That was the moment. And I said, she took notes. She emailed me the notes. And she said, well, did I understand you correctly here? And then the follow-up was, well, let's set up another call. And so that conversation was maybe 20 minutes long. It was just clearing the air. And it was great. I hung up the phone, I was smiling. I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years. We have mutual friends. So it just felt great. I felt like I had gotten back into this network that I hadn't been in for so long. And I was left feeling like, why didn't I think to do this before?
And what were you paying attention to inside yourself as you were thinking about whether or not you would experience like a loss of autonomy or control?
I was definitely listening to the mind chatter. Like, what were the things that I was saying to myself over the course of that conversation that proved to me that I was actually open to her suggestions? So normally, when someone I feel like has wronged me, I tune out. I'm nodding. I'm giving you the positive body language, but in my head, I'm making a grocery list. You know, I'm trying to figure out what's coming on Lifetime or Food Network or something that's not what's immediately happening. And I found myself asking her follow-up questions as well. And I was taking notes. And I don't take notes for people that I don't think care. So that was a huge thing. And it was a big data point for me, because when I hung up the phone and it was just me again, I actually got to look back and I had notes to reflect on for our next conversation. And I even had questions that I was curious that I wanted to ask her. And I think the biggest question that I had was, so what have you been doing for the last 5 years? Because now I actually really wanted to know. Whereas if I had asked it in the beginning, it wasn't a genuine question.
Yeah, thanks. And so your big assumption was, if I'm more open and trusting with others, I will lose my autonomy and independence.
Yeah.
How did you end up feeling about that big assumption after that test?
It didn't completely go away, but it got shaken. Mm-hmm. The foundation of that assumption was shaken because I thought that trusting and being open meant being vulnerable for someone to hurt. And I didn't leave the conversation feeling hurt. Mm-hmm. And that had been a very painful interaction. You know, we were in disagreements and arguments for months. And that was the first time in 5 years that I felt really good about the situation. So I knew that I could at least be more open with my feelings. I wasn't completely sure about the trust aspect yet. I didn't know how much I wanted to trust her, but I knew me being more vulnerable made a difference.
Did you feel less independent or less autonomous?
No. I felt kind of silly actually for thinking that before. But I'm stubborn. You know, sometimes I need time, but I didn't feel that way at all.
And so when you ran the test, can you tell me what happened?
I got to the very first day of our meeting, and I sort of walked in with this agenda, like, I'm going to tell you what it is. And I got really disarmed. My co-leader gave me a huge hug. And I realized that she really was excited to work with me. And that started chipping away the assumption almost immediately. I was totally disarmed. I came in with my guard up. I came in ready to, tell her exactly like it is. And, she gave me this huge hug and she said, can we just get to learn about each other for our first meeting? And that I found was a perfect platform for me to talk about my lack of experience with large groups, how I had worked alone really for 5 years, and how I was excited. I was genuinely excited to work with her. And I let her know that this was something I was using as a test. And by the end, once again, the assumption got blown up. I mean, it happens. I was able to work with her incredibly well. We've actually worked together 4 other times since this event. I look forward to working with her and that team. We are still in contact, which speaks to me being able to maintain the network. We created a listserv, where we check in with each other all the time. And it really helped me to understand that the only time I'm going to lose my autonomy is if I tell myself I'm going to lose my autonomy, but it's not actually happening. Mm-hmm. So it was really great to test it in that way and to have it come out so well.
And in that initial conversation with her, did you find that you were paying attention to particular kinds of data to challenge your big assumption?
At first I was listening for her to say things like, okay, well, I know you're vulnerable, but I'm not. Or you can share, but I won't. I was looking for some type of resistance from her, that she just wasn't open to the process, or that she thought the fact that I even had a learning goal or an improvement goal for myself was ridiculous. And those moments never came. So I had pen ready, waiting to hear them, and they never came. And I said, okay, well, maybe it's just her. And I took it to the whole group. We made the decision to share our learning goals with our entire team, and they did the same thing. And no one thought it was ridiculous. Everyone was actually excited that we were working on such a level of vulnerability with each other.
And do you remember what you were starting to feel internally during that, like, first conversation with her, and then later, in terms of?
The first conversation, I was really nervous.
Yeah.
I'm not often nervous. I was a little, sweating a little bit. I was a little shaky because I was scared about what she was going to say. And by the time, our project lasted for 3 months, by the time we got to the end of the project, I felt like a superstar. I felt like I was accomplishing and doing all these great things, and being able to talk to people about them and asking for help. I found that instead of not wanting to be open, I'm actually more open now with colleagues, and I ask them for pushback and feedback, because I realized that I've just grown so much just from hearing what other people think about my practice, and that was really helpful.
Can you tell me a little bit? I remember you mentioned at one point in the team, you reflected on the fact that we're all working from our strengths.
Yes.
And then challenged yourselves to change that a little bit. Can you describe what that test was like?
Yeah, so one of the big components of this project was we needed someone to handle all of the small details, so the PowerPoints and scheduling and things like that. And those aren't actually my strong points. What I'm really great at is facilitation. And we found, my co-leader and myself, we found that we were segmenting ourselves into our 2 strongest things. So she was sending out all the emails and all the responses, and I was the one who was facilitating all of our team meetings. We realized this maybe halfway through the project, and we sort of came to that realization together, and we said, so what are we gonna do? And she said, well, I'm challenging you. I wanna facilitate more, and you wanna learn how to create PowerPoints and presentations. And her next statement sort of blew me away. She goes, how can I support you in this transition? Because I know those aren't things that you're really comfortable with. And that right there was, the assumption crumbled. I was just so happy. And it was the first time where I was like, as the perfectionist, yes, I don't know how to do something. And yes, there's actually somebody here to ask for help. And she's willing to help me. This whole team is willing to help me. And I was able to learn how to do PowerPoint. I know how to do PowerPoints now. I know how to do like setting up all these different tasks and different apps to get people to collaborate. So it was great. I learned a whole lot on that, not just that my assumption was wrong.
So, in being more open and vulnerable, it sounds like in some ways you actually were a little less autonomous or had a little less independence, but that wasn't a terrible thing?
No. I felt relieved. I felt relieved to not have to carry everything. And what was wrapped up in that autonomy was the burden of feeling like everything was on my shoulders. And that was something that didn't come out in my map, but I quickly realized was another thing that I was just believing. And when I released and when I let go, I found that I was more like myself than I was when I worked by myself. Because when I worked by myself, I was hectic, I was manic, I was insane, I was stressed out. And the minute I started asking for help, I found myself more free to actually do the things I wanted to do and didn't feel bound or constrained by all these other things that I hated doing.
And what kind of progress were you making on your column 1 improvement goal?
That test really proved to me that I had the capacity to achieve the goal. And I still work on that goal, but I'm in such a different place with it. I can't believe that I used to think that. That's what I find myself in a state of belief these days. And now everything I do, I don't do anything by myself anymore. I'm like, oh, I'm by myself. I don't know what to do. I need help, or I want to speak to somebody about this idea. And I find myself gravitating toward groups and different circles to get that feedback.
Thank you. That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Looking back over all the tests that you designed and ran, how do you think about that process?
I go back to that initial feeling of wonderful, scary. I remember the first moment where I was vulnerable, really, with anybody for a long time, and that was with you, and how it grew from me having one conversation with you to then me having so many conversations with different people. I found the map incredibly helpful because it was a visualization of what I was thinking. And while I don't necessarily consider myself to be a visual learner, I have my immunity change map on my fridge because I wanted to make sure that I was really like looking at the things that I did, because I wasn't doing them on purpose. I didn't mean any harm by them, but it caused a lot of harm to me. And for 5 years, working in a silo and not being able to talk to anybody and feeling like I couldn't, not that I wouldn't or shouldn't, I just felt like I couldn't. So to then have all these tests and to consider that maybe what I thought was wrong, I felt like I grew up a lot. I believed that I could be wrong, which I don't think I believed that last year. So believing that I could be wrong, finding out that I was wrong, and being incredibly happy about it. I've never been so happy to be wrong. Don't tell anybody that. Don't tell anybody that. but it was really wonderful, and it's an improvement goal. I'm really happy I chose that goal, because it was something that I could test. It was something that was directly related to my career, and it has had impact on my friendships. I've been able to go back and to speak to people again, people that I pushed away, people that I hurt, and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, and really mean it. So it's been really, really wonderful in more ways than just work ways.
Yeah. Do you have advice for anyone else who's starting to test their big assumptions?
It's the same advice I think that I gave myself, is be absolutely honest with yourself and know that this is not going to be comfortable. It's not comfortable, but sometimes you learn so much in sitting in discomfort, and that's okay. That's what I would say.